Number 12. Australian Killer Eagle. An eagle tried to swoop down and snatch a little boy during a wildlife show at Desert Park in Australia. It was a wedge-tailed eagle, the biggest bird of prey in the country. This monster of a bird has a wingspan of roughly 9 feet or just under 3 meters and is capable of lifting animals off the ground that weigh up to 10 pounds or just under 4.5 kilograms. We said animals, not children of course. But this eagle really tried to steal one and take the kid back to its nest. Witnesses to the show who saw the horrific drama unfold said the boy had closed the hood of his sweater around his face. Apparently, this confused the eagle. It dived towards the boy, made contact with its claws as if it was about to pick the child up by its hood, but realized at the last second that it wouldn't be able to do that. The kid was fine in the end, but the park canceled the shows for the rest of the day. The guests were terrified. This was actually not the first time an eagle tried to do something like this. According to The Atlantic in Milwaukee, an eagle snatched a 2-month-old baby from its cradle and then flew it all the way back to its nest. That story occurred quite some time ago, back around 1910, as reported in the Milwaukee Sentinel. When that happened, though, a sharpshooter had to take the eagle out and then climb up to the tree to rescue the baby. But sadly, it was too late, and the baby had already passed away. Number 11. Indonesian singer killed by cobra. Another performer was attacked when the king cobra bit her on stage during a performance. The Indonesian singer, famous for performing with live and dangerous snakes, finally concluded her farewell act. The king cobra was sick and tired of working for nothing, it seemed. The performer's name was Irma Bull, which may not sound familiar to the Western world, but she was well known throughout Southeast Asia, and she was only 29 years old when she was killed. It appears that performing with lethal animals on stage is permitted in Indonesia, and the performer exploited it as a gimmick to gain more and more fans. In 2016, though, she was in the middle of her second song of the evening. Irma stepped onto the snake's tail, which caused the animal to lash out and bite her on the thigh. A bite from a king cobra almost always means a death sentence. These snakes can reach a length of 18 feet or just about 5.5 meters and are extremely venomous. Irma died as a result of the neurotoxins delivered in a single bite, which was enough to have killed 20 people. Despite being bit, Irma kept on with the show for 45 minutes, and she didn't even realize that she got bit. Maybe it was the adrenaline of the show, but as soon as it ended, she vomited, had a seizure, and died soon after. Number 10. Elephant Revenge Attacks. Elephant revenge isn't a new concept. They are extremely intelligent creatures. Elephants have intricate social structures, and yes, they really do enjoy a good taste of revenge. They have a drive for vengeance unlike any other species thanks to their excellent memory. Not only do they not forget, they also don't forgive. When an elephant was hit and killed by a passenger train, its grieving herd went on a rampage and destroyed the neighboring communities where their friend had been struck. This happened in India back in 2013 in Matari, which is a small village. The elephants tried to return to the area near the railway where the comrade had been killed, but the locals in the area held them at bay by setting firecrackers off and making loud noises. The creatures retaliated the next night by attacking another town, destroying houses and anything they could find. Finally, a specialized squad was dispatched, and they were successful in driving the herd out of the area before they could kill anyone. At the very least, the elephants took justice into their own hands. Number 9. The neighbor's kangaroo. A man in Tennessee strangled his neighbor's pet kangaroo to death after the kangaroo attacked his wife. This may be one of the strangest cases of revenge in a very long time. The owners of the pet kangaroo, unsurprisingly, are furious by what unfolded. It started when the neighbors contacted the owners of the kangaroo, Hope and Chris Lay. They said the animal had gotten out of its normal area and was getting a little too close to their property, and it was making them nervous. They asked how to get the animal back into its enclosure. The owners weren't home, but they informed the neighbors that they could use the kangaroo's food to lure it back into confinement. They said they'd be home in an hour and would deal with the issue themselves if the neighbors weren't up for it. In that hour, the kangaroo allegedly assaulted the female neighbor after she got too close. Of course it did. It was an animal defending its territory. A dog would probably do the same thing, right? And the woman's husband wasn't about to just let the kangaroo attack its wife. Enraged, he started strangling the animal until it was dead. This wasn't just any wild kangaroo the Lays had been keeping. It was their pet, a pet they loved and raised since it was a baby. It actually didn't hurt the woman badly. It just gave her a tap to warn her to go away. What do you think the Lays should do in this situation? Whose fault is it? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 8. Camel Threat. Law enforcement officers were called to a petting zoo in Tennessee in March of 2022 after a camel escaped and killed 2 men. When deputies with the O'Brien County Sheriff's Office showed up, they discovered the men dead on the ground. When they tried to place one of the men inside the ambulance, a camel came out of nowhere and attacked the vehicle. The animal was acting extremely aggressively, and the police had no choice but to shoot it on the spot. The deceased were identified as Bobby Matheny and Tommy Gunn, both from Tennessee and both working at the petting zoo in Shirley Farms. The camel had somehow managed to get itself free of its enclosure, at which point it turned on the men and mauled them to death. If you didn't think camels were dangerous, this should be a wake-up call. The desert creature became violent with no warning and trampled and bit both men until they were no longer breathing. Camels can be wildly dangerous and are able to kick forwards and backwards. They also have 2 pairs of canine teeth which are extremely sharp, and when they get into a frenzy, it's not easy to calm them down. Sadly for these 2 zoo workers, they learned that the hard way. Number 7. Squirrel Rampage. During the Christmas season of 2021, a squirrel went on an insane rampage, injuring 18 people. The vicious little animal terrorized the countryside of Buckley in England, earning itself the nickname Stripe after the mean critter in the movie Gremlins. Corinne Reynolds, a 65-year-old woman, had been feeding the squirrel for about a year. The little guy actually was a frequent visitor, stopping by her garden for a snack now and then. It stole bird food and would even take nuts right out of Corinne's hand. But one day it just turned violent. Corinne was in her garden when the squirrel showed up and started attacking her. It bit her multiple times and then it went after her neighbors. Local social media pages were flooded with pictures of people's bites from the suddenly violent squirrel. Some people had to get tetanus shots and were sent to the hospital after the furry creature invaded their property and sunk its tiny teeth into their skin. Luckily, no one was seriously injured and no one got more than a few bites and a quick trip to the hospital. Stripe the squirrel, however, was captured and had to be put down by the RSPCA. Number 6. Tiger attacks circus trainer. To be a circus trainer, you have to be a certain caliber of person. Animal handlings have recently decreased in circuses after instances of abuse were leaked, like this case back in 2016, when a tiger assaulted its trainer and finally got its revenge. At the Pensacola Interstate Fair, the animal had finally had enough, and it retaliated. The event was captured on film, showing the circus trainer punching the tiger in the face and whipping it. As the big cat got more and more scared, it also got angry. The tiger grabbed its trainer and dragged him around the cage with its massive teeth. Another worker stepped in to save his friend, and the tiger eventually let him go, but not before the guy got a big taste of his own medicine. Clearly, this violated a slew of U.S. laws, including the Animal Welfare Act. The fact that these types of circuses still exist is inexcusable. No animal deserves that kind of treatment. And while it's sick how people paid money to see someone torture a tiger, the tiger did win the fight. Number 5. Elephant crushes hunter. Instant karma hits a big game hunter who was killed after an elephant he shot fell directly on top of him. He was beaten by his own game, if you will. The man was a 51-year-old South African hunter who was leading a hunt in Zimbabwe when his crew stepped into the path of an elephant herd. 3 of the elephants broke into a stampede, running towards the group as these big animals tend to do when they feel threatened. The hunter opened fire on the creatures, only to get a surprise attack from the side. With her mighty trunk, one of the elephants scooped him up. One of the other hunters fired a shot to try and help the man, which caused the animal to fall over and crush the hunter, killing him immediately. This is quite a tragedy, since the man left a wife and 5 children behind. But that's what happens when you mess with elephants. He made his money, according to reports, by taking wealthy Americans into the woods to hunt exotic animals. These were his, quote, skills. So you could say it's a little ironic that he was crushed to death by an elephant. Number 4. Dogs ruin car. This is one of our personal favorite stories on the list, and we think it should start from the beginning. First of all, the incident happened in China, where a guy kicked a dog that was minding its own business, sitting in a parking spot in the lot of an apartment building. The man kicked the dog to get it out of the way so that he could park. Rude. The next morning, the guy found his car completely destroyed. It was covered in bite marks, scratches, and other intentional damage. The driver only realized what had happened after learning his neighbor had videotaped the incident. The dog came back with some friends after getting kicked, and they had a free-for-all on the abuser's car. This proves that dogs can remember mean people and will take their vengeance. It also shows that you should never trust a neighbor who sits there taking pictures of wild dogs ripping your car apart, but in this case, we'll let it slide. The man had it coming. Number 3. Wild boar seeks revenge. Wild boars seem to be relatively harmless and essentially just shaggy pigs, but if you're not careful with them, they can get pretty nasty. In the northern region of Spain in 2015, a hunter bled to death after a wild boar attacked him. The local police called it a freak accident, but it was pretty clear that it was just a pure, cold-blooded murder. It all started when the hunter decided to shoot the boar instead of walking down to the store and buying some food. His hunting dogs surrounded the animal after he shot it, and just as the man was about to finish the job, the boar charged and tore up his leg. This is similar to what happened to the man and the elk in the previous story, but this guy died from blood loss. He was flown to the nearest hospital by helicopter, but did not live to see another day. Sadly, neither did the boar. Number 2. Lions maul poachers. In our next story, a rhino poacher is mauled to death by lions in the South African savannah. And it wasn't just a single poacher, but a large group of them that was attacked. They were allegedly trespassing in an African game reserve when it happened. According to the reserve's owner, it was a spot where people can camp and go on safaris. The poacher apparently crept into the park wanting to poach some rhinos. Apparently some lions were making a lot of noise early that morning, so some of the park's personnel were notified. It wasn't until the next day, though, that the anti-poaching unit discovered the poachers' bodies. They also found a firearm, gloves, wire cutters, and a backpack full of food. They had all of the supplies necessary for killing a rhino and taking its horn. According to officials, the group of poachers accidentally stumbled into a group of 6 lions and never made it out. Poaching rhinos has increased by almost 8,000% just since 2007. You'd think that as a species approaches extinction and the global disapproval of hunting grows, this rate would slow down. But it's actually just gotten worse. Number 1. Poacher eaten by lions. We previously discussed a gang of poachers mauled to death by lions, and now we have an incident that's pretty similar, with a twist. In 2019, an elephant killed a rhino poacher in South Africa's Kruger National Park, and the poacher was then eaten by lions. When officials came, all that was left of his body was a skull and a pair of pants. The event took place when a man entered the park with 4 others to poach rhinos. Then, out of nowhere, an elephant attacked, killing him and driving the rest of the poachers away. While this is a nice story of an elephant defending his fellow animal, what happened next was actually quite disturbing. The man's family was notified of his death and a search party was sent out to find the body, but none of the rangers were able to locate it. It wasn't until much later that they discovered his few remains. Authorities suspect a pride of lions found the body and did what lions do best: eat. And for some, this is called the circle of life. Number 10. Sloth bear mauls couple to death. Just recently in June 2022, 43-year-old Mukesh Rai and his 39-year-old wife Gudiya were returning home from temple in Panna, India, when the unimaginable happened. The couple was walking through a forested area when suddenly they spotted a sloth bear in their path. The sloth bear looked at Mukesh and Gudiya like people look at a server in a restaurant bringing a hot meal to the table. The bear first attacked Gudiya, killing her quickly. As Mukesh tried to save his wife, he too was killed. The unsuspecting pair was viciously mauled by the creature. It tore their bodies apart with its sharp claws and teeth. They never stood a chance. The bear dragged the remaining pieces of their bodies towards a river and feasted on the carcasses for more than 4 hours. Eyewitnesses that came across the gruesome scene told the Times of India that a crowd of villagers gathered at the spot and tried to scare the bear away by firing gunshots in the air, but it wouldn't stop. Once forestry workers and emergency teams arrived on the scene, it took officials more than 2 hours just to tranquilize and capture the beast. Neha Sinha, a conservation biologist and author, told CBS News, quote, "This is very unusual. Usually sloth bears eat honey and insects," end quote. For the last 2 decades, escalating deforestation has been depriving bears and other species of their natural habitat, and putting them closer into proximity to towns and villages, and incidents of violent animal-human confrontations have been on the rise in India. Unfortunately for this couple, they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Number 9. Elephant flips SUV. What started as a scenic drive through a wildlife park turned into a terrifying situation for a family in January 2022. Tourists in South Africa got a closer wildlife encounter than they expected when an angry elephant flipped over their SUV with them inside. The bull elephant, which was about twice the size of a car, charged at the vehicle as the family of four, 2 kids and their parents, were driving through the Isimangaloso wetland park. A car that was driving behind them witnessed the elephant ramming into the side of the SUV, rolling it onto the roof and pushing it off the road. It was like a scene straight out of Jurassic Park. The elephant then starts playing with the vehicle, stomping on it and shoving it even more. The other driver tried to scare the elephant away by honking their horn, but it didn't work. Thankfully, the family only suffered minor injuries during the attack, although they were a bit shocked at the ordeal. Park officials have pledged to investigate what caused the elephant to react so violently. Number 8. Hungry Hungry Hippo. In May 2022, a safari guide in Zimbabwe named Paul Templar was swallowed by a monster hippo and survived. Paul wasn't supposed to be giving a tour that day. His friend that was supposed to lead the canoe safari had come down with malaria and Paul took his place. He recalls feeling like something was off that day, but couldn't pass up the fantastic chance of paddling down one of the most beautiful stretches of river in the world. The wildlife expert was leading a small safari tour of 6 people down the Zambezi River when the attack happened. After approaching a stretch near Victoria Falls, trouble became apparent when a hippo knocked someone out of their canoe. Paul paddled towards him to help, but the hippo started going towards Paul below the surface. Suddenly, everything went dark, and Paul realized he was in the hippo's throat. He managed to grab hold of the hippo's tusks and push himself out. He was only out for a split second before being swallowed again, this time feet first. Paul was trashed around in the water, trying not to drown before the hippo spat him out a second time. But as he swam towards the group, he saw the monster hippo charging towards him with his jaws wide open before dragging him to the bottom of the river. As he's lying on the bottom of the river, Paul sees his own blood mingling in the water, and he was eventually rescued by one of the brave people in the group. It took 8 agonizing hours without any painkillers to get Paul to a hospital where he had his left arm amputated by doctors. Tragically, the man who was knocked from his canoe by the hippo drowned. Number 7. See you later, Gator. On May 31st, 2022, 47-year-old Sean Thomas McGinnis was found dismembered at Taylor Lake in Largo, Florida. Sean frequently waded in the alligator-infested lake to retrieve wayward frisbees from a nearby disc golf course and then resell them. Quote, when Sean McGinnis was recovered last week, he was observed to be missing 3 limbs, Largo police spokeswoman Megan Santo told the outlet. Sean was found by a lady walking her dog nearby. 2 weeks before he died, Sean was standing chest deep in the lake and realized the risk he was taking. His friend, 47-year-old Derek Eskin, said he was fully aware, and he continued by saying he seemed to be pretty comfortable with what he was doing. End quote. A park ranger had previously tried to get Sean removed from the area for trespassing, but was unsuccessful, according to public records obtained by the station. Florida Fish and Wildlife trappers caught and euthanized 2 large alligators in the lake following Sean's death, but autopsies later revealed that they weren't the ones involved in the horrific accident. Do you think Sean had it coming to him? Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 6. Ravenous Polar Bear. In August 2011, 17-year-old Horatio Chappell and 80 other students went on a month-long Arctic expedition to Norway's Svalbard archipelago. About 3 weeks into the trip, the British teens spotted a massive polar bear footprint in the snow. Everyone was pretty excited about it, but no one seemed scared. A few days later, a polar bear breached the faulty tripwire that was meant to protect the campers from any attacks. It slashed open the tent that Horatio was sleeping in and viciously clawed at his head and upper body, killing him and injuring 2 others that were in the tent with him. 2 expedition leaders were also wounded before the bear was shot dead. Horatio's parents, who had expressed concerns about the possibility of a polar bear attack before the trip, accused the expedition company of failing to keep their son safe. A coroner's inquest agreed that the tripwire system wasn't up to safety codes. It was missing parts, forcing the group to unsuccessfully try rigging it with paper clips. Further investigation revealed that the group's rifle was old and difficult to use, and that the group didn't have enough firearms training. Consequently, the expedition leader who shot the bear was unsuccessful on his first attempt and had to reload the gun as he was bleeding from his wounds, delaying the kill. An autopsy of the bear's remains determined that the animal was old, starving, and had bad teeth. The specimen's circumstances are without a doubt what triggered it to become desperate and surprisingly aggressive even for a polar bear. Number 5. Beach boar. A wild boar sent sunbathers fleeing in absolute terror on Costa del Sol beach in Spain in June 2022. The animal appeared to be disoriented and confused as to where it was. Tourists were screaming and taking cover as the boar ran over their towels and along the sand, where moments earlier they had been tanning themselves. A 67-year-old Spanish tourist was lying out soaking up the sun when the beast went after her. The animal attacked the older woman, biting into her flesh with its long, sharp teeth as people on vacation could do nothing but watch in horror. The boar had been spotted in the water by the boat crews who alerted lifeguards on the beach as it began to make its way towards land, after they made an unsuccessful attempt to catch the slippery boar. It's believed to have come from the nearby Serra Galada Natural Park, but it's not clear how it ended up in the sea. Lifeguards managed to chase the boar away from the shore and crowded beachfront bars and cafes before it caused any more panic. Medics who treated the unnamed woman, who was the only person injured in the chaotic scene, said her minor leg injury was cleaned and she was told to take antibiotics to prevent infection. Wild boars have been coming into towns and cities to forage for food more and more recently, with the numbers rising during the coronavirus pandemic. Number 4. Yellowstone bison. In June 2022, a 25-year-old woman was gored by a bison at Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming after she approached the animal. According to a press release, the unidentified woman from Grove City, Ohio, walked towards the bovine as it neared the boardwalk just north of Old Faithful. As she got within 10 feet or just about 3 meters of the animal, it charged towards her, gored her, and tossed her flying another 10 feet or 3 meters into the air. The victim suffered a puncture wound among many other injuries and was taken to the hospital. Visitors to Yellowstone are advised to stay at least 75 feet or just under 25 meters away from large animals like bison, bighorn sheep, elk, moose, deer, and coyotes, and at least 300 feet or just about 90 meters away from wolves and bears. Bison are North America's largest land animal, standing over 6 feet or just under 2 meters tall. Bison have injured more people in Yellowstone than any other animal. They are unpredictable and can run 3 times faster than humans. Number 3. Singer vs. Coyote. In 2009, 19-year-old up-and-coming Canadian folk singer Taylor Mitchell had some free time between stops on a concert tour and decided to take a solo hike at Cape Breton Highlands National Park in Nova Scotia. That same day, an American couple visiting the park noticed some wolves who seemed to be completely unshaken by the presence of humans. Minutes later, the couple heard howling and what sounded like a woman screaming. They decided to call authorities from a parking lot phone booth and pass their observations on to a few other hikers they saw. Along the trail, the hikers found Taylor's keys, pocket knife, and shredded pieces of her clothing. Further down the trail, they saw a coyote standing over Taylor, who was covered in bites and other serious injuries but was still conscious. The hikers tried to scare the animal away, but it didn't run off until a police officer showed up and fired his gun. Taylor was rushed to the hospital, but she had lost a lot of blood and it was too late to save her. She died from her injuries. The cause of the attack was unknown, and evidence suggested that the animals had stalked Taylor for quite some time before chasing her, and that she had tried to sprint to her car but couldn't outrun them. There were also signs that Taylor had tried defending herself against the coyotes with her pocket knife and her car keys. The encounter is the only known fatal attack by a coyote on a human in Canada, but it happened amid a particularly brutal flurry of attacks that left several people injured, indicating that the coyote population was rapidly increasing. Taylor's parents said that their daughter was an animal lover and that they didn't want the coyotes who attacked her to be killed, but law enforcement thought it was more important to act in the public's best interest. They identified the attackers, who were covered in Taylor's blood, and shot them dead. Number 2. Brawling with buffaloes. In early 2018, wild buffaloes started mixing in with cattle herds owned by farmers in Zimbabwe. The buffaloes strayed into the grazing pastures from nearby Hwange National Park, leaving farmers with the tricky task of chasing them away. Thabani Dube, a villager in the area, was tending to his cattle when a buffalo began following around cows that were in heat. He had a difficult time keeping it away, and it continued to return to the herd. The buffalo charged at Dube's bull, prompting the farmer to release dogs on the animal, which then grew even angrier and ran towards Dube himself. Using its horns, it gored the man's shoulder. Luckily, he managed to escape without any serious injuries by running away and crossing a trench that the buffalo couldn't get over. This was just one of numerous attacks that have occurred as the problem of the buffalo intermingling with cattle has worsened. Villagers and officials who were left terrified that at some point there would be a fatal confrontation. There are also consequences of pregnancies between buffaloes and cows, which create wild and aggressive offspring that have no business being on a farm. Around the same time this happened, residents also complained about wild hyenas and lions preying on their livestock. A Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority spokesperson reassured the public that they were taking the reports seriously and responding to them as quickly and effectively as possible. Number 1. Playing dead. Frank Logan was out with friends at Bodega Rock Island in California's Sonoma County when a terrifying attack took place. All geared up with a snorkel and a wetsuit, the 25-year-old diver set out looking for sea snails and abalone with his pals. The group had only been in the water for 25 minutes when suddenly Frank felt something tear at his legs and crush his back and chest. It was a massive 13-foot or just under 4-meter great white shark. The apex predator bit into Frank's side and began shaking him violently. Instead of struggling against the shark, Frank cleverly decided to play dead and let his body go limp. As a result, the shark carried him 16 feet or about 5 meters down into the sea before releasing him from its death grip and swimming away. Frank's pals dragged him out of the water with blood gushing out of him and quickly rushed him to a nearby hospital. He received over 200 stitches to repair his gaping wounds. It was an extremely close encounter, one that most people wouldn't walk away from. The idea of playing dead probably saved Frank's life. Number 9. RAMREE Island. The Second World War brought about the suffering of millions of people, not even counting the emotional damage it must have taken on the people of that time. From constant air raids in some countries to literal genocide, there's no doubt it was one of the darkest times in human history. But, on top of all this chaos, yet another tragedy took place. They call it the RAMREE Island Massacre. And no, it wasn't entirely due to war efforts, there was much more natural disaster waiting in the shallow waters. Ready to strike. Crocodiles. Now, these beasts are known to be deadly, and on January 26, 1945, it was no exception to this stereotype. While British troops arrived on the island in order to try and push the Japanese forces away, no one expected to face an enemy other than their human counterparts. As over 1,000 men made their way into the thick and dense vegetation in the island swamp, the crocs struck. Surprisingly, RAMREE has one of the biggest populations of saltwater crocodiles in the world. The animals themselves are terrifying and can grow to be massive, some reaching over 20 feet in length or just about 6 meters, and weighing nearly a ton. It's safe to say they could overtake a man in a matter of seconds. So just imagine as these men came trampling into the beast's home, covered in drops of blood and sweating bullets. It was just like ringing the dinner bell. Survivors from that day estimate there were nearly 500 men killed in the swamp, being devoured by the hungry crocodiles like the legs of a chicken. They say the night of the attack, the screams of dying men could be heard lingering in the air, only to be suddenly cut off by a silence that spoke much louder. To this day, the massacre holds the record for the most people killed in one feeding frenzy crocodile attack, and hopefully, that number will never be surpassed. Number 8. Belly of the Beast. A young teenager named Ricky Gagnon went out one day to collect snails, as he often had before with no trouble. But little did he know his trip would yield different results. Near the river in Kuching, Malaysia, Ricky's aunt watched his final moments in terror, unable to do anything to help. While bending down to pick something up, a massive crocodile appeared out of nowhere, grabbing Ricky by the ankle in its giant jaw and dragging him into the murky depths of the river. Immediately, his aunt ran to get help, and soon, rescuers were on the scene. But it was too late. They tried using a bait to coax the crocodile into coming out, and after a short while, the beast crawled out, allowing them to quickly put a snare around its neck and pull it onto land. Once they had it where they wanted it, they took a giant knife and slashed open its stomach contents. Pieces and parts of not only Ricky's clothes, but Ricky himself splashed out onto the sand. To the family's dismay, their beloved boy was gone. The remainder of his body was sent back to their family home so he could at least receive a nice burial. At least for some form of closure, the crocodile was killed, hopefully ensuring that a similar attack will not take place. But for Ricky's family, nothing could replace or make up for their lost loved one, taken from them much too soon. Number 7. park ranger. Australia has had the reputation of being a country with lands full of inhospitable landscapes, terrifying creatures, and extreme temperatures for centuries. While much of the island continent remains unsettled, only a small portion has been modernized. Of course, it's not all bad. There are many wonderful people who live there and an abundance of beautiful places to see. But sadly, this story doesn't focus on the good. In October of 2018, in Northern Australia, a park ranger was attacked and killed by a crocodile. The woman, along with a few of her family members, went fishing in the morning, and while she was away for a brief moment from the group to gather some mussels, the creature got her. Her family says it was like 1 second she was there and the next missing. All they heard was a few little splashes, then they noticed the bucket she was using floating nearby. At the time of the attack, the water had been up to her waist, so it's not surprising the croc was able to sneak up so easily. Around 5 o'clock the same day, the police found her body as well as the beast responsible. It was nearly a kilometer, or about 0.6 miles, away from where the family reported her missing. They worked quickly to put the crocodile down so they could recover as much of the woman as they possibly could. Along with this grisly encounter, the very same animal had been the cause of multiple other attacks in the area. It's just sad that the locals weren't able to catch it before it could take someone's life away from them. Have you ever seen a crocodile in person? Did you know how deadly they can be? Let us know your answers in the comments down below, and if you liked the video so far, make sure you subscribe to see more content like this in the future. Number 6. Pet. For some odd reason, having dangerous creatures as pets has caught on to be a strange trend. Exotic pet owners likely give these animals homes either as some kind of power trip or perhaps to rehabilitate. A good example of this is none other than the Tiger King himself, Joe Exotic. But there's countless others who take pleasure in owning these wild beasts, and sadly it can often backfire, and there's a good reason why animals like crocodiles aren't usually kept as pets. But one farm in Indonesia didn't listen to any of these warnings. Although she didn't take the croc to her own home, she instead fed it at her job. Daisy Tuo was still bit and mauled by a crocodile, being kept in illegal captivity. Inappropriately named Mary, the 1,543-pound or about 700-kilogram beast reportedly tore Daisy's arms clean off, as well as a majority of her torso. There's conflicting reports on how this incident even happened. Some say that she was pulled into the water by Mary, while others claim she accidentally fell in. Either way, her remains make it inconclusive what actually went down. They found her body the day after the attack, after it had been mutilated further. When questioned by news outlets on why this animal was allowed to be kept, the local Nature Resources Conservation Agency said that they've tried to remove Mary multiple times before, but the gates had always been locked. But this answer wasn't good enough, and now there's a manhunt for the owner of the farm to try and get more answers. Number 5. OSAMA. Fairy tales and legends often depict fearsome monsters and mythical creatures that lure people into the woods or prey on children in the night, and most would say these stories are all untrue. But history has reminded time and time again that stories are usually built on truths. So where does that leave us with this listing? Well, near a small village named Luganda in the country of Uganda, a modern-day beast was turning villagers into its prey. It was none other than the killer croc, OSAMA. Over the course of 15 years, starting back in 1991, nearly 83 people had lost their lives thanks to the beast. It's believed that once OSAMA had a taste of human blood, he never wanted to go back. The surprising part is that, compared to other crocodiles mentioned in this video, he really wasn't the biggest croc we've seen. But that in no way means he was small. OSAMA measures 16 feet or about 5 meters long. Villagers tell tales of the creature toppling boats or jumping aboard to gobble up an unsuspecting fisherman. In the small village, about 10% of the entire population had fallen victim to a singular aquatic murderer, until finally, in 2005, they caught him. Biologists estimate OSAMA to have been 75 years old at the time of his capture. It took the help of 50 people as well as the Uganda Wildlife Authority to make the historic catch. Although activists might look down on what happened to OSAMA after his days in Luganda were over, we see it as a form of justice. You see, out of the dozens of people the crocodile killed, there were children and elderly included. Just like any other murderer, OSAMA was sent to life in prison. Well, if you can call captivity to eventually just be used as breeding stock prison, at least his reign of terror was over. Number 4. Just a boy. In the Malaysian city of Sabah, a young 8-year-old child was killed while playing in the water with one of his friends. Around midday, the boys were greeted by a monstrous crocodile that latched onto the child. His friend, obviously terrified, swam back ashore as quickly as possible to get help. The father of the boy was nearby and set out to search for his child. Sadly, they found him, but it was already too late. The crocodile had injured several key areas of his body, including his waist and stomach. The search team took the child's body back to land and sent him to be looked at by a professional mortician. This was just one crocodile attack out of multiple that happened in the same week, although in other instances, the victims made it out alive. In response to the uptick in crocodile aggression, locals in Sabah have set up many traps to try and ease the growing problem. We can only hope they're able to do so before another child is taken. Number 3. Melissa LAURIE. Mexico is a popular vacation spot known for its beautiful beaches, incredible views, and delicious food. It's also a great place where many people go to volunteer. There's lots of remote villages and small towns in the country that are in need of schools and funding, so many volunteers come to offer assistance, including a pair of twins from Britain. One of them, named Melissa LAURIE, would never make it home. She was attacked by a crocodile. She was pulled under the water by the beast, to her sister Georgia's horror. After she suddenly disappeared, Georgia found Melissa, but the croc wasn't done with her yet. It came back around multiple times to try and finish its job, but the protective instincts kicked in. Georgia wasn't going to let it have her sister, so she started hitting the crocodile in the face. Thanks to her bravery, the animal eventually swam away. Melissa still had some serious injuries though. A giant bite on her leg as well as a pierced lung sent her on a trip to the hospital. Initially, she wasn't responding to anything, but thankfully she did wake up. She still has a long way to go to be fully recovered though, so her family set up a crowdfunding campaign for her to help pay the expensive medical bills, and it miraculously met its goal. Georgia is just happy her sister will be okay, but honestly, we're just impressed by how she was able to take on a full-size crocodile. Adrenaline can do a lot of things, but that was pure bravery. Number 2. Queensland. While going for a quick swim in the small bay in Queensland, Australia, 2 soldiers were attacked and traumatized by a crocodile. The 2 men that fell victim sustained multiple broken bone injuries, with one of them having their arm torn into. Thankfully, the men were able to escape and report what had happened to them, but it took a while for them to be rescued. A helicopter even had to be flown in to take the soldiers to the hospital, and when they finally arrived, those that helped bandage them up say the soldiers were very clearly in shock. When local wildlife officers found out about the incident, they had to take matters into their own hands. They decided to set out and find the beast in question. It didn't take long to figure out who was responsible. As they approached the scene of the crime, one croc in particular began to get extremely aggressive. In order to capture it, they used the finest equipment they had available, including aerial drones, snares, and more traps. Soon, they took down the crocodile and killed it. In this instance, relocation was not an option. It wouldn't be good to have an animal capable of that much aggression and violence towards humans in any case. Number 1. Kayakers. After setting out on what was supposed to be a fun, laid-back kayaking trip to the Congo, 2 Americans, Ben Stooksbury and Chris Korbelik, were shocked and horrified by what they witnessed. While out on the water with their river guide, Hendrik Coetzee, they watched as a massive crocodile yanked Hendrik out of his kayak into the muddy water below. At the time, they were on the Lukaga River, so luckily they were near a small village. The Americans found some locals who let them borrow a cell phone to call for help. Soon, a humanitarian group sent a team out to pick the men up. Before they could come home though, Ben and Chris had to meet with the Congan police to detail what happened. All 3 of the kayakers knew the extreme risk of their trip before embarking on it, but despite the warnings of the wildlife, they brushed it off and set out. It seems that Hendrik was an experienced and well-known outdoorsman, so he wasn't worried about the threats. Sadly, because of their lack of preparedness and refusal to heed warnings, Hendrik lost his life, and his body has yet to be recovered. Thanks for watching. Do you know about any other crocodile attacks we didn't cover? What other animals would you be interested in hearing about? See you next time on The Bad Badger.